Does it ever seem like you can't get your guitar perfectly in tune? I should warn you, this is kind of one of those red pill, blue pill situations. And it's arguably better just to leave it alone and continue going through life cheerfully oblivious to the true reality. But as musicians, we're compelled to study the mysteries of acoustics and harmony, and our innocent desire to be perfectly in tune is like a thread, and by pulling on that thread, we can begin to unravel some of the mysteries of the cosmos. And fair warning, once you know the truth about tuning, you can't go back. If you're still here, let's start to unravel this mystery by making the world's most in-tune sounding E major chord. I just tuned to a tuner, so it will probably sound pretty good. But you know, sometimes I think I can make it just a little better by ear. Okay, now that's an E chord. And now it's time to relax and play some nice music. What the heck? My C chord sounds really out of tune. Okay, let me just whittle away on that for a second. Okay, so now I've got my C chord sounding good again. And so I'm back to my song. What? Now my A chord sounds bad. Now you might think that a piano, a keyboard, or some kind of digital instrument would be able to play perfectly in tune in every key. And it's very close, but what those instruments are incredibly good at is being just a little bit out of tune. And I think I can show you the difference. When we tune it to its most sweetest, perfectly blended sound, we call that a just tuning. And here is a just C chord. Now, just like guitar, if we tune the piano to sound amazingly perfect on the C chord and then sort of work out from there, we will eventually find that the farther the chords get harmonically from C, the more out of tune they will sound. So these tunings are what we can call justified, or like based around a certain key. Now let's really listen and see if we can hear the difference between a pure major triad and the one in our modern tuning system. And it can help to deconstruct it a little more and listen just to the root and the fifth. It's close enough not to even really bother us, but it is barely perceptible to the trained ear. And then let's check out the thirds, which sound perfectly in tune when there's an exact 5:4 ratio. And notice how sweet the pure one sounds, and how our usual major thirds are actually a little bit sharp. But for some reason, the universe won't let us have our cake and eat it too. We can either be perfectly in tune for one chord and one key and then out of tune for the others, or we can just always be a little bit out of tune, but equally across all keys. Now, virtually every tuning or temperament system recognizes octave equivalence, where we perceive frequencies that are exactly double or half the original as being fundamentally the same as each other. Amazingly, our ears, especially with a little practice, can hear with incredible precision when the 2:1 ratio is perfect and when it's not. And this phenomenon is so obvious that it seems to be a self-evident truth of music theory. Octaves should be in tune. And it seems like simple math would agree, because if we have the whole string as 1, or the fundamental, and then we divide it into 2 equal parts, we can have the ratio of 2:1, which is equivalent to the 12th fret, and we get an octave above the open string. The next whole number division of the string is into thirds, and we can find the ratio of 3:2, or the whole string compared to this part. And this is what has become known as the perfect fifth. And it's the second most stable and sort of fundamental sounding interval. Now, we started to unravel this mystery by tuning our modern day guitar, but even in the oldest known tuning systems, they were already confronted by the same problem. We start with our assumptions of octave equivalence and perfect fifths as being 3 to 2. Now, to fill in the rest of the scale was essentially to make a perfect fifth and then make another above that. But then whenever the next fifth ends up being outside of the octave, we can drop it back down. So eventually we get through all 12 notes and get back to where we started. Except for we don't. We're actually a little sharp. Now remember, these were like the people who believed in the harmony of the spheres and that the universe was governed by the perfection of simple harmonious mathematical ratios. And so probably at first they just assumed that they did it wrong. But with every repeated attempt, there was always the same discrepancy, and we call it a comma. And the existence of this comma was sort of a thorn in the side of the pervading worldview of simple harmonic ratios governing the universe. And instead, it hinted at irrationality in math, which the Pythagoreans would not accept. And it's true, the universe gives us the ability to hear the perfection of these simple ratios. But the system that we use to get octaves and the system that we use to get perfect fifth seem to be incompatible. And the other thing is, this system is quite good for fifths and fourths because that's how it's derived. But the thirds end up being a good amount sharper than the pure ones, even sharper than the ones we get from equal temperament. And so thirds were considered dissonances, and that's why music mostly used octaves and fourths and fifths. In the Renaissance, music started to have more thirds and their inversions, sixths, and had the beginnings of triadic harmony. And we also have the emergence of leading tones and more complicated harmonies. And so what a temperament basically does is attempt to iron out the biggest dissonances, but at the expense of introducing a bunch of small dissonances. The tuning systems that were developed in this era are called mean tone temperaments, and I think the basic idea of these is to construct them in sort of the same way as the Pythagoreans, but all the fifths are slightly flattened to help bring the size of the thirds down a little. So the Pythagorean major third makes the triad sound a little dissonant, but the mean tone is closer to perfectly in tune in some keys, but the trade-off is that other keys get increasingly out of tune. And nowadays we use equal temperament, which sort of seems like the obvious solution, where we just space each note equally. Now I wish it was going to be so simple as just saying equal temperament. Oh, modern guitars have that. But if you notice, guitar is not quite as good as piano or keyboard at sounding in tune across all keys. And it's because a keyboard instrument can individually tune each note. With strings and frets, we can tune the whole string, but then each individual note should work because of the equal temperament placement of the frets, right? And I hate to tell you that in addition to the fact that the universe won't allow us to create any instrument that can be perfectly in tune, even the compromise of equal temperament has a lot of issues on guitar. When we figure out the mathematical ratios of the spacing of the frets, it's based on an idealized model of a string which is only based on its length. There are actually other sneaky little factors. But when you carefully measure and place the frets based on the sound of each note, you get something more like this. And even these frets aren't exactly equal temperament, but it's a closer approximation. And the point is to expect there to always be some compromises when we're tuning. So our fifths are always going to be a little flat, and our thirds can always be a little sharp. But if we know that in advance, it will make it a lot easier to tune. And then equal temperament is how we tune all the modern pianos and keyboards and 99% of electronic sounds we hear. And so when we play together with other instruments, all those slight differences can actually sort of smooth out the discrepancies. And consciously or subconsciously, musicians often subtly adjust the tuning of notes to create more consonant intervals. Knowing about temperaments and tunings will allow you to control your sound better. And it's another aspect of performance that you can use to express yourself creatively.